Hello, friends. Today we're going to talk about manipulation techniques. These insights will help you recognize when someone is trying to manipulate you and give you tools to protect yourself. Let's get started. The first technique is gaslighting. It's a form of psychological abuse where the manipulator makes the victim doubt their memories, perception, and sanity. Typical phrases include, "You made that up," or "You're remembering it wrong." The manipulator might also move things around or deny their words, causing the victim to feel unsure of themselves. For instance, the manipulator might hide house keys and then claim the victim misplaced them, making the victim question their ability to perceive reality accurately and increasingly depend on the manipulator. The second technique is using guilt and shame. The manipulator makes the victim feel guilty or ashamed to control their behavior. This might be expressed through phrases like, "If you loved me, you'd do this for me," or "You should be ashamed of your behavior." These feelings make the victim strive to please the manipulator to avoid unpleasant emotions. For example, the manipulator might remind the victim of past mistakes, emphasizing how they impacted their life, thus intensifying the guilt and coercing the victim into compliance. The third technique is subtle threats. The manipulator hints at possible negative consequences if the victim does not comply with their demands. For example, "It would be a shame if something happened to your career," or "I wouldn't want you to have problems because of this." These hints create fear and anxiety in the victim, compelling them to obey the manipulator's demands to avoid potential troubles. The manipulator may also use the victim's past experiences, suggesting that similar unpleasant events could recur if the victim does not comply. The fourth technique is alternating between patronizing and compliments. The manipulator first criticizes the victim and then suddenly praises them, creating emotional swings. This makes the victim strive to earn praise and avoid criticism. For example, the manipulator might first demean the victim by calling them incompetent and then praise them for a minor achievement, making them feel significant. This enhances the victim's dependence on the manipulator, as the victim constantly seeks their approval. The fifth technique is isolation. The manipulator tries to isolate the victim from their surroundings so they cannot receive support or alternative viewpoints. This can be done by controlling social connections and limiting access to information. For instance, the manipulator might criticize the victim's friends and family, convincing them that these people are untrustworthy. As a result, the victim starts relying solely on the manipulator, losing the opportunity to seek external help. The sixth technique is deliberate misunderstanding. The manipulator pretends not to understand what the victim is saying to make them feel incompetent and dependent on them. For example, the manipulator might intentionally distort the victim's words or pretend not to understand obvious things, forcing the victim to constantly explain and justify themselves. This lowers the victim's confidence and increases their dependence on the manipulator. The seventh technique is changing the subject. The manipulator avoids discussing uncomfortable topics by abruptly shifting the conversation to something else. This makes the victim feel that their questions and problems are not important. For example, when the victim raises a significant issue, the manipulator might suddenly start discussing something completely unrelated, diverting attention and avoiding accountability. Over time, the victim may stop bringing up important topics, fearing they will be ignored again. The eighth technique is false promises. The manipulator makes promises they know they won't keep to keep the victim under control. Often, such promises are made when the victim is demanding something important to them. For example, the manipulator might promise to change their behavior or fulfill an important request for the victim, but never follows through. This creates false hope in the victim and keeps them clinging to the possibility of change that will never come. The ninth technique is playing on emotions. The manipulator provokes strong emotions in the victim to influence their decision. This could be fear, guilt, pity, or even euphoria. For instance, the manipulator might scare the victim by exaggerating the potential consequences of their action, or evoke pity by sharing exaggerated tales of their suffering. These emotions cloud the victim's judgment and make them more susceptible to manipulation. The 10th technique is using authority. The manipulator refers to authoritative sources or figures to support their arguments. This creates a sense that the victim should follow these recommendations or instructions. For example, the manipulator might say, "Experts say this is the only right way," or "Most successful people do this." This makes the victim feel they must comply to avoid being unprofessional or incompetent. The 11th technique is dehumanization. The manipulator tries to reduce a person to their role or function, stripping them of their individuality. This makes the victim feel less significant and unique in the eyes of the manipulator and others. For example, the manipulator might constantly highlight only the victim's professional qualities, ignoring their personal virtues and achievements. This diminishes the victim's self-esteem and enhances their dependence on the manipulator's opinion. The 12th technique is personal attacks. The manipulator attacks the victim's personal qualities instead of addressing the issue at hand. This causes the victim to start defending themselves and lose focus on the core conflict. For example, the manipulator might say, "You're always so useless," instead of discussing the actual situation. This shifts the focus from the problem to the victim's personal traits, making them more vulnerable to manipulation. The 13th technique is playing on contrasts. The manipulator presents two options, one of which is clearly less appealing, to push the victim towards the other option. This creates an illusion of choice, though it is actually quite limited. For example, the manipulator might offer, "You can stay home and do nothing or come with me to this important meeting." This forces the victim to choose the option that benefits the manipulator, even if neither option is particularly appealing to the victim. The 14th technique is using sympathy and pity. The manipulator makes the victim feel pity for them to get what they want. This is often used to gain help or concessions. For example, the manipulator might share exaggerated tales of their hardships and suffering to make the victim feel compelled to help. This evokes guilt in the victim for not assisting and coerces them into complying with the manipulator's demands. The 15th technique is mood swings. The manipulator abruptly changes their mood from joyful to aggressive to keep the victim on edge. This creates a sense of uncertainty and fear in the victim. For example, the manipulator might be friendly and affectionate one moment and suddenly become angry and start yelling the next. This keeps the victim constantly alert, trying to avoid situations that might trigger the manipulator's negative reactions. The 16th technique is devaluation. The manipulator belittles the victim's achievements or efforts, making them feel inadequate. This lowers the victim's self-esteem and makes them more dependent on the manipulator's opinion. For instance, the manipulator might say, "That's not such a big achievement," or "You could have done better." This makes the victim doubt their abilities and strive for the manipulator's approval. The 17th technique is provoking envy. The manipulator intentionally showcases their successes or achievements to make the victim feel envious and inadequate. For example, the manipulator might constantly talk about their work achievements or new purchases, making the victim feel less successful. This creates a sense of inadequacy in the victim and pushes them to seek the manipulator's approval. The 18th technique is misinformation. The manipulator provides false or distorted information to confuse the victim and make them make wrong decisions. For example, the manipulator might distort facts or provide false data to make the victim take a decision that benefits the manipulator. This reduces the victim's ability to assess the situation accurately and makes them more susceptible to manipulation. The 19th technique is sudden demands. The manipulator suddenly presents demands or conditions to catch the victim off guard. This creates stress and a sense of urgency, compelling the victim to comply with the demands. For example, the manipulator might suddenly demand the completion of a complex task in a short time frame, creating a sense of urgency that forces the victim to comply to avoid negative consequences. The 20th technique is playing on a sense of duty. The manipulator reminds the victim of their obligations and duties to make them act in a certain way. This is often used in personal and family relationships. For instance, the manipulator might say, "As a good friend, you should do this for me," or "You should take care of the family. It's your duty." This evokes a sense of responsibility in the victim and coerces them into complying with the manipulator's demands. That's it for today. Now you know a variety of manipulation techniques. Remember, it's important to be aware and protect your boundaries. If you like the video, give it a thumbs up and subscribe to the channel. See you next time.